Now, we go to our next speaker, which is Professor Georg Northoff, a renowned academician and researcher connected to the University of Ottawa in Canada's Institute of Mental Health Research. He's the Michael Smith Chair in Neurosciences, the Director of the Mental Health Research Unit, and holds the Canada Research Chair in Mind, Brain Imaging, and Neuroethics. Dr. Northoff has a doctorate-level degree in psychiatry, in neuroscience, and in philosophy. And he has done countless groundbreaking studies and published innumerable articles and books. And I will mention the most recent one that appeared, I think, 1 month ago, Neurowaves, Brain, Time, and Consciousness. I read it in one sitting. It was that good. And from experience, working with Professor Northoff is anything short of spectacular. His expertise, deep and very wide expertise, is astonishing to witness, and I'm lucky to have him as a supervisor. Professor Northoff, we invite you on the stage.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for introduction. Also, thank you for inviting me here. And already this morning, I ran around Bucharest and discovered some really nice areas. So thank you. I think nobody can, I can see the slides, but the audience can't. Aha, there it is. And as you may know, this guy has a castle close to Bucharest. And he did some interesting experiments in the movie, and it was actually shot there. So I'm looking forward going there. And you already see the title of my talk, and also the question beneath is sort of program. Because I go from brain to mind. When you look at a lot of consciousness research these days, is trying to map the mind onto the brain. I go the opposite direction. And the key question for that is written below. You see that Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th century philosopher in Germany, I'm originally from Germany, he spoke of the brain as a gray, pulpy device. I added the gruesome, because when you see the brain, it's not particularly appealing. So how is it possible for that gray matter and its neuronal activity to transform into consciousness and mental features? That's the question I'm trying to address in this talk. So, and as you already saw in the title, we developed a particular approach to the brain, to the mind, in particular as a brain-mind connection. So important for me here is that any model of the brain or theory of the brain activity has to include a necessary connection to the mind, unless the brain theory remains incomplete. So I will give you a little bit, first a little bit about theoretical background. So I basically practice a little bit what Stephen introduced you as non-reductive neurophilosophy. So now I put some flesh to the bones to that. So I will, oh no, there is a pointer here. No. Then I will go discuss a little bit the 2 dimensions of consciousness, level state, which were already mentioned by our Italian speaker, and another, which I introduced by myself, the form or structure of consciousness, which has its philosophical roots in Immanuel Kant. And then at the end, I will discuss about the relationship between 2 mental features, consciousness and self, because I also know that the subsequent speaker, Anil Seth, will probably also talk about the self, so I want to provide a little bridge to that. So in all that, we call the temporal spatial theory of consciousness. So let me start with the background. When you look into the current debate about consciousness in philosophy, in psychology, and neuroscience, consciousness is always considered something special. It's an add-on. There are specific phenomenal qualities, qualia. There is a special form of meta-representation, reflection, metacognition. Yeah, and that is, you see this in philosophy here. In psychology, I brought in Ned Block as a philosopher who did the distinction between access and phenomenal consciousness. And now all the neuroscientists might forgive me because they also look for some special mechanism in the brain, which is added on to the otherwise non-special mechanism. So it's basically like, okay, the brain is non-special, it is non-conscious, and then on top of that, there is a specific mechanism which accounts for consciousness. For instance, and I know I'm not allowed to stand here right in front of the camera, so, and then you have this special mechanism and different theories of consciousness in the neuroscience. What is it? Is that a different thing? What is that? I shall change? The battery, yes. Oh, the battery. Oh, okay, it dies, as long as only the battery of this one and my own battery. Okay, so and you see here in the consciousness debate, you have special mechanisms like a global neuronal workspace, like information integration, like embodiment, to the otherwise non-special theory. There's a prevalent, probably Anil will mention that, a major theory of the brain, lower right, predictive coding by Carl Friston, free energy, and I will probably come back to that. But that really is, where is the link to the mental? So it's really a difference between the special and non-special features of the brain. That's sort of a conceptual overview, and for the philosophers, I don't need to tell you, that's sort of a latent dualism. It's a latent neuronal dualism that goes back to, for instance, René Descartes in the 15th, 16th century. Yeah, so now I switch to the next slide. And that, as I said here, we provide an overview. This is a review paper I did together with Victor Lamme in 2020. You will see another recent review paper by Anil and Tim Bain, probably in his presentation 2022. And we reviewed different theories of consciousness here and basically the different mechanisms. Next one. Okay. Yeah, and you see that's what I see here. Embedding and integrating a special neuronal mechanism like integration, like neuronal workspace, like higher order theory within the otherwise non-special neuronal features of the brain. So, however, as you know, you could do things also in a different way. Rather than emphasizing the difference between the neuronal correlates of consciousness and the otherwise non-conscious neuronal mechanism of the brain, maybe we can also detect some similarity. Yeah, so maybe there is something similar between the brain activity we measure and the consciousness, the experiences we have. So consciousness is here defined as experience, a subjective experience. For instance, when you listen to me, and you probably say, I've got another one of those neuroscientists just talking. Instead of really explaining consciousness, he's just talking. So you have a feeling of boredom. Yeah, I may be able to see it in your face, but I can't feel it. I can't experience it. Yeah? So, that's what I mean here by consciousness. So experience in a wider sense. That has a strong philosophical background, which goes back to Kant and others. Yeah. So here you see sort of, I look for the similarity. Now, of course, the next question you say, what on earth do brain and mind share? Because the philosophers tell you they're always different. The brain can be observed in third-person perspective. Experience is only in first-person perspective. When you observe something, you don't have specific feelings or experiences, but your specific experience has specific features. So how can Northoff come along and say they share something? Yes, they share something. And what could they share? So here, I go back to a very nice quote of Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was an engineer, turned 19th, 20th century. He went from former Yugoslavia to New York and invented a lot of patents. And he said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So it's the most basic dynamic features of the world, and you see them. For instance, what do I mean by dynamic? When I have a certain dynamic here in my gait, or now my dynamic becomes faster, my speed, I have a certain rhythm, and my speech also has a certain dynamic. As you see, I like to present things in a dynamic way. That's why I walk around. And so, and also, a slight hint, look at the website of Nikola Tesla. There's no coincidence that Elon Musk named his cars Tesla, because the two guys are equally brilliant, but also, I think, equally eccentric. So highly recommended to look him up. It's quite interesting. I don't say more. So, but that sets the stage for what I'm doing, because you go back to the very basics of nature. So I look into biology, into physics, in order to see how brain and mind are linked. So I do not resort to specific features in the brain or wherever to explain what we call mind. I go backwards to the basic features of nature. So this is what we laid out in this paper. So what do brain and mind share? They share dynamics. Yeah, that's exactly as Nikola Tesla said, and you will see in the subsequent slides of mine how we put this to empirical practice. So that's why we speak of a common currency, and to make things a little bit more concrete, the brain, as you all know, has a multitude of regions, and these regions and networks are organized in a certain way, they stand to each other in a certain way, and you can call that topography. So we look, and you will see this, at the overall topography of the brain rather than single regions or networks to explain conscious phenomena. And then also there's temporal dynamic, as I said, is a pattern of change over time. Yeah, how do I change? For instance, you have when I walk here around, you can basically trace the coordinates, how I use the space, so I have a certain topography of my walking, and I would assume that topography of my walking, I know it's difficult for the cameraman with me, probably reflects a certain topography also in my brain, because otherwise I wouldn't walk in this topographic way. And the same for the dynamic. Now I'm a little bit faster, that's just to prepare you. And so that's basically, and you will see examples of that in my talk, yeah, how we link those measures. So, and based on that, we developed what we call the temporal spatial theory of consciousness in various papers. And we call this the TTC, and that has two key features. First, it really focuses on the spontaneous brain activity. So in your brain is continuously active, whether you get an external input or not. Whether I'm standing here or not, for your brain, it doesn't matter so much, to be honest. Yeah, it's continuously, spontaneously active and follows, like me walking here, in a certain topographic pattern and a certain dynamic pattern. That's what your brain does, and it comes out a very complex coordinate system. And we try to analyze these coordinate systems and relate them to consciousness. And that's the second key point of the TTC, that we really try to link these topographic dynamic pattern to corresponding topographic and dynamic pattern in your mental features. I will bring you the example of meditation later in the self and meditation, where we show that. Yeah, and remember what I said, the way I walk here, the topographic and dynamics I walk here, should probably somehow reflect the topographic and dynamic pattern of my brain. Same with neuronal and mental states. The topographic and dynamic pattern of your brain should somehow be reflected in and latency and structure also your mental features. So we speak also of a mental topography and a mental dynamic. So the temporal spatial theory of consciousness has different mechanisms. That's also a distinct feature, because all the other theories have only one mechanism, because they just highlight the special mechanism and the rest they're not interested in. But the TTC really focuses on different mechanisms for different dimensions, features of consciousness. And I will show you two examples in my talk, the temporal spatial nestedness here on the left and the temporal spatial alignment. Okay, so now I gave you the conceptual background, so this is the background on which I operate, and this basically shared features between neuronal and mental features / the common currency / space and time / topography and dynamics. And now I show you some empirical data supporting this assumption. So, our Italian colleague already introduced the level or state of consciousness. Is basically your awareness, your arousal, how much you're awake, or maybe you're just, okay, Northoff talking, and he's always walking, so forget all that. I just fall asleep. So meaning your level of consciousness will decrease. And that's the kind of phenomena we investigate, and we assume that's a specific mechanism, what we call temporal spatial nestedness. And let me explain some of that. So when you look, now I go back to some basic dynamic features in the brain. For instance, here, upper left, you see some time series, basic neuronal activity is in raw data. And if you decompose that, you decompose it in different kinds of waves. Remember, Robert already announced my book, Neurowaves, and your brain is full of waves, yeah? And you have different waves and different speeds, different frequencies, as we say in EEG. You can measure this with gamma, beta, alpha, etc., and very slow, yeah? And interestingly, when you go on the seaside, you see big waves. They're slow, but very powerful, because you're really afraid of those big waves smashing you back to the beach. And then there are a lot of faster waves. You're not afraid of them because they're not as powerful. And the same in the brain. So you see a lot of big waves. See this here, down here. The big waves have a slower frequencies and a lot of power, and the faster waves, faster frequency, have less power. So there's a certain relationship, and these waves are sort of nested within each other. Again, look to the seaside, and you see at the seaside there's a big wave, and there's a lot of small waves integrated within the big waves. Yeah, and that's what you call nestedness. And the typical example for nestedness, as you all know, are the Russian dolls, different sizes, same shape. That's a typical nested, and the same here with what we call the power spectrum, the different waves in the brain. So, and now the idea is that this relationship between faster, less powerful, and slower, more powerful waves may be related to your level of consciousness. So how many Russian dolls, how they are well integrated each other, that's what we call temporal nestedness, and we want to see, is that disrupted in the case of consciousness? So I show you some data from an earlier study here of ours, and look at the lower left. So first we studied people in the awake state, and then in the anesthetic state, so they were completely anesthetic, and we did it in fMRI brain imaging, and then we measured, and you can see the huge difference in the degree of what we measure scale-free activity for the experts among you. Basically, the degree of nestedness is slow, fast, power discrepancy, and there's a huge difference. And look at the curve. So this is the awake subject, this is frequency, this is the degree of power, and the slower the frequency, the higher the power. That's very normal, and the faster the frequency, the less the power. Now, look in the anesthetic states, it's completely flat. So the usual relationship, the power relationship, the discrepancy of power is no longer there. All the waves are the same. It's like when you go to the seaside, it's basically flat, or it's always the same. It's very monotonous, no differentiation. They all have the same power, the wave. That's exactly what we observed. And this is so basically the structure of your wave activity, of the different waves, is completely broken down. Yeah, and that's when you lose consciousness. And we could see this in different data sets, as you can see below. So meaning your nestedness is no longer there. So suddenly you just have one big Russian doll, and that's it. Yeah, they're all the same. They don't fit in each other. The usual thing where you detect another one is no longer there. It's flat. So, and then we say, so that's basically your temporal nestedness is lost. So now the question, how about the spatial nestedness? So there is what you call in the brain, you can measure the brain's global activity over all its regions and networks. So it's not, and you can basically measure that for the specialists among you in fMRI, the global signal. And this activity is particularly related to the very slow waves. Yeah, and that activity is always there. So we said maybe in these disorders of consciousness, when you lose consciousness, your global activity decreases. Meaning when your level of arousal or alertness decreases, maybe your global activity also decreases. So now I'm looking for somebody who's asleep here, but I can't see it. So lucky you. And so I would expect that the person who sleeps now, that global activity is a little bit decreased. And show it the results here. So this is a study. So here we investigated using, again, fMRI, people with sleep. The more red, the more reduction of your global activity. And the more red, the higher your global activity. Here are the different sleep stages. And you can see here, between the first sleep states, non-REM 1 and 1, you still have a lot of global activity. But then when you get deeper into sleep, here in 2 and 3, your global activity decreases hugely. Then, interestingly, we did the same in anesthesia. So again, in the awake state, you see a lot of global activity, a lot of red. And in the complete anesthetic state, no global activity anymore. So it's extremely low. That is probably related to the energy and the metabolism your brain gets. And then we did patients in coma. You can again see this is a healthy control group, and these are minimal conscious state, unresponsive wakefulness. You see basically the global activity hugely decreases. And here, this was quite interesting, we did this also in rats. We put rats in fMRI, gave them some anesthetic dose, and you again see in the low dose a good global activity here. You see the same here in the unconscious state, the violet stuff, global activity hugely decreases. So that's probably related to your level of consciousness, your global brain activity, how much arousal, how much alertness you have. And that means if you don't have the global activity, it can also no longer really differentiate. So what we showed, I hope I indicated that what we call nestedness on temporal and spatial level, I indicated that here, basically decreases. So what does this mean? The brain's activity becomes more homogeneous. Everything is the same. It's like the flat sea. It's boring. After watching it for 5 minutes, you get bored because nothing happens. It's always the same. That's probably the way your brain looks like when you lose consciousness. And what does this mean here? Here we indicated, look, then also the different time scales of the brain. Here, this is the awake state. We have different time scales, slow and fast waves, different power. Here, it gradually diminishes, and when you lose consciousness, it's completely black. Everything is the same. And what does this mean again? That also your external inputs are no longer differentiated. So when here, nothing is processed. Yeah, it's still processed, but it's not differentiated. Everything is the same. So this is the way we imagine it, and based on this nestedness. So I hope that gave you an idea again how on purely temporal and spatial measures we relate to the level or state of consciousness. But now you want to have the really interesting thing. Where is experience coming into play? How is experience shaped by this? And for that, I want to go to the next measure, what we call temporal spatial alignment. And I will spend a little bit more time on that to develop that, because it's a very unique feature of our theory of consciousness. What do I mean by alignment? So when you listen to music, you will unconsciously tap the rhythm of the music here. Unconsciously. And then, important, you feel a groove. You're in synchrony with the music and you feel great. Same, my other example, my beloved one, is the surfer. When the surfer really aligns her or his own dynamic on the movements to the ongoing change and dynamics of the wave, then first the surfing is great and the feeling is great. So when you align to your context or you feel in synchrony with somebody, then you feel good and you have consciousness. And you feel miserable when you can't align. I will come back to that. Then you have to visit me as a psychiatrist. I'm sure you want to avoid that by all means. So, what is alignment? And here I show you some recent empirical studies, and it's quite amazing. So when, for instance, an external stimulus is presented, get some water here. Okay, I can't open this one. Okay, so when, for instance, an external stimulus is presented every 40 to 50 seconds, for 2 seconds, boom. Now I have to wait 40, 50 seconds, I'm too impatient. Another stimulus, yeah, and another stimulus. Your brain follows that frequency of that stimulus. It's amazing. So this is here, this is Philip Klar, one of my clever PhD students, showed that. So here you see, remember you have already seen this is a power spectrum, this is frequency power, slower frequency, more power. And this is the resting state without any stimulus. Now the subjects get a stimulus every 50 to 60 seconds. It's crazy. Just short stimulus, 50-second break. Short stimulus, 55-second break. And your brain aligns in exactly that frequency range of the external stimulus. So it follows that frequency range of the stimulus, and you can see that here. This is the frequency range of the external stimulus, and it really follows and enhances its activity, its power in exactly that frequency range of the external stimulus. Compare this one to this one, because here you don't see that peak. It's amazing. Yeah? So it's called task periodicity, often neglected. Yeah? So, and I'm sure that your brain will follow me in my movements when you pay attention to me, of course. Yeah? If you sleep, of course, then you will not follow. Yeah? So your brain will somewhat try to make sense and try to discover a certain periodicity in my movement so that it can synchronize with me. Why does the brain do that? I tell you in the next slide. Again, so here you can see this again. This is another paradigm where we had 25 to 30 seconds stimulus interval. You can again see the peak in the awake state. You can see the peak in the awake in the sedated state, and if you lose consciousness, there's no peak anymore. Yeah? So your brain in the unconscious state, in the anesthetic state, doesn't follow the external environmental temporal structure anymore. So when you are unconscious, you cannot follow these movements anymore. Please tell me if you can't. Yeah. So yeah. So it's really amazing, task periodicity, and we see this in a variety of data sets now because it's often been neglected, the way the external tasks are presented in imaging. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And down here we have a simple computation model, a computer model, where you said, maybe this task periodicity is a basic phenomenon of nature. Remember Nikola Tesla, we're looking to the basic phenomena of nature. So it's basic dynamics, there's nothing special to the brain, and that's exactly what we show here. So here we present a computational model with different degrees of this scale, free activity, slow, fast frequency, and we present a sine wave, a slow sine wave, a medium sine wave, and a fast sine wave. And look what happens. Yeah? So your initial state of the system, of the model, adapts to the frequency of the sine wave. Yeah, this is a fast sine wave, and you see differences. So what we present here, and which is related to consciousness, task periodicity, is nothing special. It's a basic phenomenon of nature. Ask the birds, ask the animals, they know this much better than we do. Yeah, and that's consciousness. It's nothing special. Yeah, so. And this is a beautiful figure here by Philip Clark, again by the clever postdoc. This sort of slow, fast discrepancy in the power is also called pink noise, because you have more power in the slower frequency than in the faster. You have brown noise, you have even more power in the slower frequencies. So when you have a pink noise in your resting state, you can very well align to the environment. So if you have this temporal spatial nestedness of your power spectrum. However, if you don't have that, then it's just white noise. You cannot align anymore to the environment. So you lose consciousness. Yeah? And interestingly, this kind of pink noise structure is also abundant in the environment. Again, nothing special when it comes to the brain-mind connection. These are ubiquitous phenomena of nature. Good. So now I show you another example of alignment. So as you know, I'm also a psychiatrist, so I deal with mental disorders. And the key of mental disorders, that's why they come to you, these patients, because they cannot find their way within the world. They cannot interpret it. They cannot behave. Sorry, you see, they cannot behave, they cannot relate, they cannot synchronize anymore or align. For instance, in depression, the patients are too slow. They cannot align anymore. The environment is too fast. And that's exactly what they experience. So we developed a whole neuroscience for depression as a speed disturbance. So here, I show you another example of schizophrenia. So schizophrenia, as you probably know, is characterized by hallucinations. You hear some voices. So when you hear my voice, it's not good. Then you need to call me. I give you my number. Or you have a delusion, you have the feeling Northoff is following you through Bucharest. That may be the case tomorrow morning when I run again, and so forth, so that I don't lose my way. So here is, we show in schizophrenia, they have, and when you do, for instance, music therapy with schizophrenic patients, the schizophrenic patients are those standing around, don't know what to do, then they tap a little bit, but it's completely non-synchronized with the music. So what we measured here is how they can shift their neuronal activity, more for the specialists now, the phase onsets, their phase cycles, to the onset of the external stimulus. So something like that. Yeah? Now I assume that your motor regions in the brain and your sensory regions will probably somehow synchronize with this if you pay attention to that. You have no control over it. Forget it. You cannot stop it. Yeah? That's why I'm doing it now. And yeah? And that's, you synchronize. And why do your brain synchronize? Because by that, maybe you have an idea to understand what Northoff is trying to convey. Yeah? It's a synchronization. You have a feeling, you feel synchronized, you feel resonance, you feel great, and you may also understand what I'm talking about. Yeah? And the schizophrenic patients don't have that. Let me show you a little bit more the details of the data here. So you see here, so this is a healthy subject, and you see they can synchronize very well, so they have what we call a high phase coherence. Like here, the red angle, it's always in a certain angle, the ongoing phase cycle, and that means they really synchronize with an external tone. For the experts, this was an auditory output paradigm. Now in the schizophrenics, they don't have that. No specific phase synchronization. So they cannot do this. Yeah, and then what do? Of course, they detach, they isolate it. Yeah, and actually we replicated that, and this seems to be also specific for schizophrenia, because we also did this in other mental disorders like depression and bipolar, and we could not find this. So this might be a biomarker for clinical application. So there's a diagnostic specificity. They cannot synchronize with the external event. So meaning they lack the temporal spatial alignment. And an earlier psychiatrist beautiful description coming from phenomenology. Minkowski spoke of a lack of vital contact with reality. So here, they cannot follow the dynamic. What is vital is dynamic, it's pattern of change. Yeah, we just discussed it. We had a discussion in the intermission about this. Yeah, so it's really, it's probably, the title here in schizophrenia is probably a reduced temporal precision. They're temporally imprecise in the millisecond range. And we have plenty of other studies where we show exactly that. So they're always slightly inappropriate in their timing. So then now you say, yes, Northoff, this is all nice, but how is that manifest in experience? So now here is a study. Sorry, I'm too fast. I didn't see what I'm pushing. Here we developed a specific scale for time and space experience in schizophrenia, because we want to see what are these neuronal deficits, how they impact your experience, the link to consciousness, neurophenomenon, neuromental. So here, and what we observed, and this is an often reported phenomenon, but we were the first here really to quantify and scale it, they experience often a strong temporal fragmentation, so that they have the feeling that the ongoing stream of consciousness is interrupted and doesn't go on. These are typical experiences of temporal fragmentation or thought blocks, what I just presented to you. And that's exactly what you see. So it's like a ship on the water. Suddenly the river has some blockages and it can't go on. And then it goes on. So, and you see this, and we develop now similar time and space experience scale for depression and other mental disorders. So that already makes it clear we have multiple time scales. I need to keep a little bit eye on time. I was signaled. So that it's not just one time scale. Our brain operates on multiple time scales, and that's absolutely key for your consciousness. It's a complex nestedness between different time scales. Why is that important? Because the more time scales you have, the better you can follow the various time scales on which I operate, like my walking, like my speaking, like the presentation sequence. So that's what is called, you match, you have a stochastic, purely statistical based matching of environmental and neural time scales. Here, that presented. And that again is phenomenologically very relevant. So if we have a very long time scale, we see that what is very constant, which also operates on a long time scale, like the ongoing sea and the iceberg. Now, in a very fast time scale, this guy is just passing by. So we use a very fast time scale for that. Now imagine if you lose this time scale, you cannot perceive this guy anymore. And that's your brain, is a continuously matching of time scales. So here that again demonstrated, this comes from Federico Cirio, a postdoc student of mine in Italy. So here has it, if you have all the time scales, you can really follow this one. Police stop right now, you can put all the words together, you can also separate the words, and you can see a very nice picture. Now when you start losing your faster time scales, as it happens in sleep or when you lose consciousness, things become a little blurry, or when you're a little drowsy. Yeah, this is probably what happened, how you perceive, because you lose the faster time scales. And at the very end, when you only have a very long time scale, everything is black and disappears, because you can't segregate things anymore. Yeah? You can't segregate, and then it becomes blurry. And remember, I already showed you a former example. Give me a couple of more minutes. So why is that important? Because that gives you the time scales. When you match your own time scales with the ongoing time scales of the environment, it gives you what you can call a point of view. Yeah? And this is not just the first person, it's much more deeper. That's the basis of your subjectivity. You experience yourself as part of the wider environment. And that is really a key. The same way here, the surfer experiences her or himself as part of the ongoing wave, and then he or she is propelled. So, timescales, this is an important issue in different species. What is it like to be a bat was a famous philosopher who said that. Different points of view, so you have different points of view. The bat can process ultrasonic waves, and we can't. So, the slides here, for instance, if you have robots or artificial intelligence. So let's say you have music. Music has very different timescales, particular classical music. And now, if your robot has only the faster timescales, but not the shorter one, the longer ones, the robot will always dance too fast. Now, if your robot has only the longer timescales, but not the faster ones, it will always dance too slow. Now, and that's basically the situation with a depressed patient. That's somewhat the situation with a manic patient. Now, if the robot has a multitude of timescales, it can very well follow the music. And that's exactly the amazing thing of our brain. The brain has a multitude of timescales, and current AI does not have this multitude of timescales. So this is why I would love to build agents/robots with specific timescales built in for proper therapy of mental patients. So now I know that I'm short. I will very briefly mention the self stuff, and then I come to the conclusion. So the self, Anil will probably say more about this, is a multifaceted thing. You have a bodily self, interoceptive, an outer bodily self, exoceptive, and mental. And what we found that different regions in the brain process here. However, the lower regions, here like the insula, are replicated or recapitulated in the next level of exoceptive. And these regions are recapitulated on the mental level, plus some additional regions. So now here, typical nestedness. So your self is also nestedness. Yeah, it's a topography of self, which we now try to explore. So, and usually, this is again, your mental self dominates everything, and the other two selves, the exoceptive and the interoceptive, are somehow nested and integrated with that. So that often uses here, that is indicated, that often leads that say your mental self dominates, and you make a sharp distinction between self and non-self, a duality. However, you know that in meditation, you have also specific, particularly proficient meditators, they also have a non-dual experience. They don't make this difference between self and non-self anymore. Yeah, and we investigated these patients, these proficient meditators in their brain data, and we also show that they have much more activity in the and exoceptive self than the mental self regions. So the regions here reduce their activity, and the regions here increase their activity. So suddenly it turns around. And what does this mean in your experience? You revert from a dual mode of experience, where you make a clear distinction between self and non-self, to a non-dual mode. So meaning here, the non-dual organization of your brain translates into non-dual topography of your experience. So it's a beautiful example for common currency. So I already had that here. And I probably skipped that because I already said a lot of that. Again, if you want to shift this, your point of view shifts probably more towards this ecological background, the world, so you experience an immersion of yourself as part of the world, wider world. So, and I come to the conclusion. So I hope I could show you how consciousness and brain and mind may be related to very basic features of nature, dynamics and topography, space and time. They provide the link, the common currency between brain and mind. In the same way, English is our common language. If I were speaking now German and you were speaking Romanian, we could not communicate, but I assume there's a higher likelihood that you had learned German than I had learned Romanian. So that means that's what we find out, and that's what we call spatiotemporal neuroscience. So brain dynamics is down here, and the mental features are here, the basic features. And that, in turn, you have the other order features. So consciousness is here and not up there where it is often located. It's a key difference. Yeah? So here I look at the brain dynamics, here we look at the brain function. For me, consciousness is brain dynamics, brain topography. And mental disorders are exactly that. Remember the alignment, the task periodicity, the synchronization in the schizophrenia patients. And with that, I come to the end. Now you probably get a better idea why I called this book Neurowaves, because I think really consciousness and mental features is about waves. Thank you very much.
Go. Thank you very much, Georg, for the excellent talk, and it has been insightful for me. The first time I heard it, and now it's still much insightful. And we are hopeful you have questions in the public. So while you think of them, there is one posed by Raluca in the chat asking you, what about integrating quantum physics to TTC? What would be a first point of contact with quantum physics?
My answer is twofold. So there are quantum-based theories of consciousness around. I don't think that consciousness operates on the time-space scale of quantums. So I mean here the phenomenal experience operates on the longer time and space scale than the time-space scales in quantum. However, that of course does not contradict the fact that maybe the quantum have some kind of pseudo-causal or causal role on a very basic level, which is beyond my capacities. So I cannot say anything to that. So I don't believe in a quantum-based theory of consciousness because I think it's a discrepancy in time scales, if you want to account for the phenomenal experience. The other thing which I find very interesting about quantum theory is the phenomenon of entanglement. Whether that is somewhat analogous to what I call alignment would be subject to further research. But you see, the alignment is key for me. And I think that distinguishes the TTC from all other theories of consciousness which do not have this ecological component. And why do I say that? If I have consciousness, I experience myself in relation to you as part of the wider world. So there's always a context. Yeah, I put myself into a larger context. And when I lose consciousness, I lose that ability to put myself into the larger context. And if I suffer from a mental disorder, that is also relation, is abnormally altered. So this alignment is really key for me.
Thank you. We have a question there. Or we have a question here, for sure.
Does your theory have any predictive value to discriminate between locked-in syndrome and vegetative state?
Very good question. There's a paper coming out on exactly that. So we could really predict whether one is in a complete locked-in syndrome, is a terrible state. So these are patients with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis often. Their motor system is completely gone. Stephen Hawkins was an example, and then also the vertical eye movements are also gone. Because you can use the vertical eye movement for brain-computer interface, that's an incomplete locked-in syndrome. If you have a complete, even the vertical and horizontal eye movements are gone, there's no communication possible. So you cannot decide whether this patient has consciousness or not. And there's a paper coming out on this where we really show that the dynamic fluctuation of this power spectrum, remember what I showed in these time windows, that they basically can say, okay, this is an unconscious or conscious state. Yeah. So in that, we could make this with other conscious states, comparing with benchmarks. And that led us to that conclusion. So if that is diagnostically predictive, our measures, it means, first, this is fantastic clinically because you really want to diagnose and help these patients. Because if you have a CLIS, complete locked-in patient syndrome, and there's still consciousness and you do all kind of talking, all kind of things, it's terrible. Yeah, and maybe then you also use these conscious moments. This was a fluctuation of the consciousness, which makes sense, because the one consequence of my approach is that consciousness itself, even in us, is continuously fluctuating. Yeah, and that's exactly true. And through these fluctuations, we could discover when they are conscious and not.